Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. My name's Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion, and I just wanted to get on to talk a little bit about everything that's gone down in the NATO summit 2018. There's been a fair amount of people who've been talking about it, and of course, as expected, Trump ended up stealing the show as he always does with his loud mouth. But I don't really want to focus too much on what's going on with Trump and Germany too much, but I more wanted to talk a little bit more about Canada's involvement with NATO and what we should be doing. One thing that I've been sort of talking about for some time is I'd like to see that we end up building up our military, build it up to a point that we can actually protect ourselves, where we're not relying on America or any other countries really to defend ourselves if the situation would ever arise. Which we've been lucky so far, because really we do live in one of the safest countries in the world, and we're not a country that a lot of people look to invade, if ever, really. We have been lately, over the last couple of years, we've been starting to get targeted more with terrorist attacks. We've had a few more than we've ever had in the past, but that's some kind of its own. That's something else altogether. We're more talking in this moment about an actual full-scale invasion of the country. See, I'd like to build up Canada's military, but I don't want to build it up and become a more interventionist type country. I actually would like to build it up so that way we have it. And it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. It's sort of where I'm going with the Canadian military. And there's a few good reasons why we should have a strong military and strong Navy. Well, our Navy has been really lacking over the last few decades, without a doubt. And it's really disappointing to see, considering how Canada, after World War II, did have one of the stronger navies in the world. But we've let that go to the wayside. And something similar happened with our military, where years ago, even if we weren't one of the top 3 or 4 when it came to our armed forces, like our actual army, we at least had a respectable force, a respectable size, both in the regular forces and the reserve forces. But these are dwindling numbers these days. So I'd like to see a more recommitment to our military, and we can do this also while we're building up our military. We can meet our NATO requirements. But not a lot of people seem to be, not a lot of our people in our government seem to be willing to do this. And the NATO requirements is probably a lot of people are aware, at least by now, because of what's been, how much Trump's been talking about it over the last few days. As we sort of go through this is from the official NATO website. They're asking for 2% defense investment guidelines. And it says in 2006, NATO defense ministers agreed to commit a minimum of 2% of their gross domestic product, GDP, to spend on defense. This guideline principally serves as an indicator of a country's political will to contribute to an alliance's common defense efforts. But more importantly than that, not just willing to contribute to other allies' defense efforts, but contribute to our own defense efforts, because we can't rely on other countries to keep us safe. And I mean, even the way that Trump talks these days, for a long time we relied on the strong military, Navy, and Air Force of the Americans in order to keep us safe, just because we're in such close proximity. You can't really rely on that anymore, but we shouldn't have to. It kind of bugs me that we've always just looked to our neighbors in order to keep us safe. But as we could take a quick look through a lot of the spending that is currently out there, of course, America is number one. It's always going to be number one. They've for over the last, especially since the 2000s, they've just contributed a shit ton of their GDP to their actual military. So they're sitting at 3.6%. And then we can go down this. This isn't necessarily in order. They're kind of all over the place. They actually put them, from the way I could tell, instead of by percentage of GDP put in, they're putting by the amount of money that is actually being contributed. But anyway, and as it says at the top, in millions of US dollars. So Canada, when we go and find ourselves, gotta find ourselves on this list. I know we're on here. There we go. Right underneath Italy. We contribute about 1.3%. So we're falling still well underneath our commitment right now of what we can put towards our defense budget. And actually, one thing that I noticed too was we're actually still higher than than Germany, which is one of the main ones that Trump ended up railing against. And it kind of makes sense why he sort of made his focus on Germany, because Germany was pretty much the biggest country in the European Union. It has one of the biggest GDPs, biggest economies, biggest population. So it makes sense that if, let's just say, for the sake of argument, U.S. ever pulled out, they kind of would be the leaders of the European, of Europe in the NATO. They would be the next one to contribute, but they're not contributing as much as they should. It's only 1.2. Now, this still is much higher than what we're contributing, again, because as we take a look at our number here, 21,275. Again, this is in millions of dollars. They're 45,472. But the point is that they could actually contribute more to this defense budget, but they're not. And there's a few that do actually meet this requirement. We got the United Kingdom, and I'm not seeing it on here. Greece, here we go. Greece meets that, although Greece doesn't, considering the way that their economy has gone the last few years, it's not like it's actually a huge contribution. And some people have said that this is actually because they have more fear of Turkey right now than anything else. That's why they're contributing so much to their military, which it is possible that that is the case. But I'd like to see that Canada starts actually contributing more, because our military, not just the amount of people who are involved in our military is dwindling, but even our equipment is starting to really, it's getting old, and we need to replace it, but we're not. It says here, going back to the NATO website, today the volume of U.S. defense expenditure effectively represents some 67% of the defense spending of the alliance as a whole in real terms. This does not mean the United States covers 67% of the costs involved in the operation running of NATO as an organization, including its headquarters in Brussels and its subordinate military commands, but it does mean that there is an over-reliance by the alliance as a whole on the United States for the provision of essential capabilities, including, for instance, in regards to the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, air-to-air fueling, ballistic missile defense, and airborne electronic warfare. And this is sort of some of the problems that we're dealing with right now. This is sort of some of the issues, because we can't really be relying too much on a foreign nation to keep you safe and provide you with all these things. Now, I'm not saying that we could actually necessarily meet all these requirements, like we could match America in a lot of the things that they're describing here. But one of the things we can possibly match them in, or maybe not match, but we can meet our NATO requirements, has to be with military personnel. And we can do this quite easily, that if we were to start having more people campaigning to have more people join the military, which I think would be a very easy thing to do right now. If we start investing more in our equipment that we use, our vehicles, our military infrastructure, all these sort of things would play a big difference inside of our, would play a big difference when we're discussing our own defense. And one thing too is, like, a lot of people wonder, well, why do we have to, why should we put more out there? Why should we deal with this? Why should we contribute more? And I think actually, instead of hearing it from Trump, because a lot of people don't like Trump, let's hear it from an average American. This actually, I think, would be very important. This guy here is a guy that I've streamed with a few different times, Tom Binns. He's an American nationalist. He loves his country, but I feel that he brings out the sentiment of a lot of people in America and what they're dealing with right now and what their feelings are towards NATO. So I'd like people hear it straight from him. I just want to make sure that it's actually going to work. I'm pretty sure that the volume's going to work. But he puts it pretty well, I find, that when he's talking about a lot of the feelings, the sentiment in America when it comes to NATO. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that they would break off alliances with everybody, but let's just hear him out.
The whole idea of NATO doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because we don't really need them. Not in that capacity, right? We can be allies without spending all kinds of money defending other people. I've always had.
And that's actually, I think, the key thing, is that they're not, in what he says, is that he's not necessarily talking about not being allies, just fuck the rest of the world, fuck all our old allies. But he's talking about, why do we need to be, we as America, why does America need to be a part of NATO and spend all this money on defense and protecting other countries?
had a big issue with that. The fact that we spend billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, we send our troops overseas to protect these people who then in turn have decided they don't need to protect themselves because we've been there protecting them. Now there's a really interesting website you can go to where you can actually look up the number of active troops, auxiliary troops, potential troops, planes, tanks, this, that, and the other. It kind of gives you the breakdown for each military in the world. And Europe doesn't stand a chance against Russia in the event that there would be some kind of Soviet-style, takedown of Europe country by country. They just couldn't handle it. I mean, France couldn't handle it. Germany couldn't handle it. So especially some of the smaller countries, Poland, Ukraine, none of these people can handle Russia. So they need us, right? They have to have us. And the fact that we are starting to pressure them and say, look, if you don't start, we're out. And I think that's good. I think that's very good, because if this is the arrangement, that we're all going to spend money to mutually protect each other, then you need to spend money to mutually protect us. We're not going to sit here, and I don't. I have no vested interest in protecting Bulgaria. I have no vested interest in protecting France from Russia. It has no meaning to me over here in the United States.
And that, I think, is the key thing that he says there. He says, it has no meaning to me over here in the United States. They are half the world away in comparison when we're talking about Europe. They're about half the world away. And then this is the sort of thing that they're relying on a lot of Americans in order to keep them safe. And actually, I think this is actually a detriment, It's sort of like when you coddle the child and then it turns them into a weak adult. And this is the same sort of thing. When you don't really have your own incentive to protect yourself because you have someone else protecting you, then this is actually some of the problems that you'll get is people will stop trying to actually put their own investments into their military, and it kind of creates a weak nation. And in a way, that's what I feel that has happened here in Canada, is that without a strong military, that if ever America does decide to pull back out of the world stage and sort of just defend its own borders, well, what would that mean for Canada if we ever needed to defend ourselves? This is why I actually find that building up our military is very important. I see that we have somebody in the chat. I think that's Arjun, actually. But I will get to that in a little bit. I just want to get through this first. And this is actually something that I found was a little bit funny, is that it was only within the last few days that Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, has been really starting to say that how involved he wants to be with NATO. He's extended our mission in Latvia, which is Operation Reassurance. He's extended it recently, just as of July 10th, just before the summit started, to 2023. As it says here, the Canadian Armed Forces has members serving in Operation Reassurance in Central and Eastern Europe. They are part of a NATO assurance and deterrence measures. Their measures are to aim to reinforce NATO's collective defense. It also shows its strength in allied solidarity. He's also recently started to talk about how he wants Canada to lead the mission in Iraq. Now, when we're talking about that would be more of a training op. We're talking about more that we are going to send more troops in and take over the main idea of training the people in Iraq to defend themselves. So I found that when it comes to this, Justin Trudeau is actually as he's trying to show that he has commitment to NATO, but he doesn't want to spend the money to build up our military in order to do it. This is something that that's been in the news actually very recently when we're concerning this, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. But yeah, as we can see from here from the National Post, it says, as relevant today as ever, Trudeau reaffirms Canada's NATO ties in wake of Trump's pro-Russia comments. Trudeau made it clear that he will join his fellow NATO allies in defending an alliance originally built to counter the former Soviet Union following the Second World War. Quote, the meeting tomorrow will be an opportunity for all of our countries to rededicate ourselves to NATO, to demonstrate that it's actually important, that it actually does important things, and that the collection of values and rules that it has brought in to defend a 75-plus year ago was just as relevant today as they ever were. I look forward to having these words with Donald Trump. So he likes to feign that he actually has a focus on our military, but it's quite clear from the way that our things are going that this is not the case whatsoever. So we can see here from iPolitics says Canada expects to spend less on defense in 2018 than last year. That's in a NATO report just released on July 10th of this year. So we're already not meeting our expectations, because as again we take a look back here, we are looking at 1.3% of our GDP that's actually going to our military. And he's not even putting it in a lot of the areas that we would like to see it put into. The way that his government works and the finance minister works, it's very piss poor. They don't ever put the money into where they're supposed to. So this is quite disappointing. It says Canada is expected to spend an estimate 1.23% of its GDP on defense in 2018, down from 1.36% last year, says the annual report, which looks at military investments for all member states. And he says that it's mostly due to two one-time expenses last year, one of which was a retroactive pay increase for service members that was included in the Liberal government defense policy. The other was an unexpected $1.8 billion payment that was into the account that provides pensions for member forces and their dependents. So he's trying to make it appear as if he's actually doing something by reconfirming his commitment to the reaffirming his commitment to NATO, even though he's not willing to spend anything else. And he's also trying at the same time to make it seem like he's actually doing something for our veterans. You really think he's doing something for our armed forces and our veterans?
Nobody forced me to join the military. I was to be killed in action. What I was there for, Mr. Prime Minister, is Canada turning its back on me. So which veteran was it that you were talking about?
First of all, why are certain veterans groups in court? Because for more than we are able to give right now.
So that is what he had to say to a veteran who was asking, why is he fighting veterans in court? That they were simply for asking for too much. That's what he had to say. So he really doesn't seem to have a lot of care for our veterans. He likes them for photo ops. He likes to have our military for photo ops. I mean, even recently, like there was just something, I think it was released over the last day or two, that was showing that he was running with NATO troops. Well, this is what he does. He goes there, he shakes his hand, makes it seem like, oh, you're doing a great job, you know? Oh, are we going to give you more funding to actually do your job properly? No. But tell you what, let's go for a jog together. And it's just to make himself look good. This is what he's always doing. And we can also, there's a few different things that have come out. This one is actually very recent, within the last few days. What is the backbone of the Canadian Army doing in a junkyard? These military machines are sitting in a London, Ontario scrapyard waiting to be disassembled. Like, what the hell is going on with our military? And we can just quickly actually watch this video. Why not? Oh, wait, I didn't switch the screen. I'm sorry. Here we go. Yeah, what is the backbone of the Canadian Army doing in junkyards? So let's take a quick look at this video. If it'll load for us, we'll see. Now, that might sound good from what we saw out of there, but talk about how they're going to get, they took everything out. They're going to give them new hulls. It's going to protect the Canadian Army. But the point is that we're Frankensteining these machines in order to reuse them. And this is actually one of the main problems we have with when it comes to both our military and our Navy, is the fact that we tend to use a lot of old machines, and then we just try and refurbish them over and over and over and over again, rather than get them proper equipment that's going to work. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I have worked with machines that have been Frankenstein like that, and it never works the way they want. These are the machines are going to be constantly breaking down. It's not going to be going as well as they hope. And $1.8 billion is a lot of money, but we got to remember that each one of these machines costs multi-million dollars, so it's not going to be as much as they really are making it seem. In fact, I actually predict that we're going to see, I would say probably at least a good quarter of these are just getting completely scrapped. They're not going to get reused whatsoever. And then just to make things a little bit, so that's when we're talking about our equipment. But then even when we get into the idea of the people that we have in our military, well, we got dwindling numbers. This is actually something that kind of concerned me last time I saw. Is military looks at foreign recruits to boost ranks. Review underway to consider lifting citizenship requirements for Canadian Armed Forces. Whoa. Now you're getting into an area I really don't like. It says Canada's military is considering lifting a long-standing citizenship requirement as a way to boost its numbers. Right now, the Canadian Armed Forces offers waivers to foreign nationals only in exceptional cases, to individuals or international military exchanges, for example, or to candidates that have specialized skills in high demand. The citizenship requirement is now under review. And this is actually speaking a little more about skilled positions to engineers and the sort. This is the sort of people that they're looking to bring in, because they just don't have the numbers of the people that are willing to come in and commit their time to the military. So it's concerning too, because there are actually parallels in history where this has gone on. In fact, one thing that when we're discussing something like Rome, for instance, one thing that ended up happening with Rome is a lot of people talk about when Rome fell, it was the barbarians at the gates. Not so much, actually. Like, yes, this was a problem, barbarian at the gates, but it was actually a lot of times it was the barbarians inside the gates. And for anybody who's going to then try and criticize me for saying barbarians was actually just a term for a foreigner back in the day. It was actually originated in ancient Greece. It was for anybody that wasn't from the Hellespont, which is the mainland of Greece. People who didn't share the same culture as the Greeks. They called them barbarians, which was pretty much a term for foreigner. But anyway, what ended up happening in Rome is that... What ended up happening in Rome was the fact that they had started stretching their empire far and wide. They had so much space, and they also were starting to, their numbers were starting to dwindle in the military. So what did they start doing? The people who were not citizens, they end up hiring them on. Now, Rome always had an auxiliary army, which was they had their legionaries that everybody knows they're famous for. Those had to be citizens. Then they had their auxiliary troops, and those came from areas that they had conquered, but was not yet a Roman province, so the people hadn't received Roman citizenship yet. So these people were usually foreign fighters fighting for them. Now, usually they end up keeping a relatively safe number of them. It was about 1/3 of the total Roman army was made up of auxiliaries, and then it was about 2/3 were made up of legionaries, so citizen soldiers. But then what ended up happening is, as they stretched their numbers out, they ended up hiring on more and more auxiliaries, such as the Gauls. That was one of the main ones that they ended up hiring from. And also the Germanic tribes. That was also another big one. And what ended up happening with that was suddenly the Roman legionaries found themselves outnumbered. And the auxiliaries, they didn't have the pledge to Rome, that they didn't have the reason to defend Rome that the legionaries did. So when things started to get bad, they actually started to see a lot of their auxiliaries either turn on them or start to leave. there was no reason for them to really defend Rome when things got bad and risk their own lives, especially if we were talking about when they were fighting against people of their own sort of tribe. So if we had Germanic auxiliaries and they were fighting against German tribes such as the Visigoths, there was no reason that they should have that these people would really put all their effort in to defend themselves. So this is what reasons like this I want to see Canada's military build itself up. I want to see us meet our NATO requirements because I find it's very important. And again, when we have America that's starting to sort of look inwards and sort of stop sending their troops out, they're still willing to be allies, but they're not willing to pay necessarily. They may decide to pull out of NATO and decide that, well, we'll still be your allies and we'll defend you guys when, if you call us, we'll be there. But we're not going to pay into this NATO defense that you're talking about. And if that was the case, then somebody's got to pick up the slack, and there's no one really available to pick up that slack that they're talking about. Because again, when we look back at these numbers, and we look at who's meeting the requirement, well, we have the United Kingdom, so chances are they would be the ones that would probably have to pick up more of the slack. Because they're meeting 2.1% of their GDP to their military, so they actually would maybe also be able to. But then the next one who's actually meeting the requirements is Greece. But Greece is economy is in the toilet right now. So their 2.4% they're putting towards their military only amounts to $4,737. But again, we're dealing in millions of US dollars. So we don't really have people that are willing to take over. So it is important that we build up our military for these reasons. And there's other reasons for it too, because things like national pride is something that would definitely increase if we had people in the military. Because right now, things like when you have our leader telling people that Canada is the first post-national state, and how things like how he's jealous of immigrants because they get to choose this country. Pretty much he's making the idea of a Canadian patriot and a Canadian society, a Canadian culture. He's been trashing over the whole thing. This is something that can actually help build up that idea, that sort of sentiment when it comes to Canadian pride, which for some reason these days, being a Canadian patriot is considered a bad thing. Now, it's not just in Canada, it's all over. I know America is going through a lot of the same thing where an American patriot is seen as like they're getting just slandered every left, right, and center. But yeah, but anyway, this is why I wanted to sort of talk a little bit more about building up the Canadian military and meeting our NATO requirements, because I actually think it is very important that we do this. I'm just going to quickly go to the chat, sort of check out what people have been saying, and then that's it for me. So let's see what we got here. All right, let's see. Arjun. Yeah, welcome back, dude. Trump really teabagged German Hillary. Good. Well, Merkel has definitely been a terrible leader, and things are starting to turn on her right now in Germany as people is. It was a terrible decision for her to just open her borders like that, which is, I guess, Canada can't really say too much against it because of it. But anyway, it was like her own people are starting to sort of turn on her because of everything she's done. If Trump defunded NATO, will Trudeau be able to come up with extra funds to compensate along with any other NATO country? No, he couldn't, especially because he's more or less said there are no plans in action right now to actually increase the NATO funding at the moment. That to increase our military spending on defense. All he wants to do is sort of use these small little missions that we're taking part of and showing as his NATO contribution. But we need more than that. He wants to use the NATO mission to Latvia, which right now is more of a symbolic sort of mission. They're not really going into a combat situation or anything, but they're going there to show sort of solidarity with the Latvians. And they're also there just to sort of make their presence known, although I don't think Canada is really intimidating Russia right now. He's not really intimidating Russia right now. And then he's talked about how he wants to take command of the Iraq mission. Well, the Iraq mission right now is just a training mission right now. We're not put ourselves into a combat situation. So he's trying to use these as showing a big contribution from Canada, but these are just peanuts considering some of the things that we could actually get into someday. I mean, if we ever got into a really big war, what is going to be Canada's contribution? What can we contribute because of our military is steadily going downwards? considering you can't fund veteran programs. The citizenship requirement law in all countries is a question of loyalty and trustworthiness, also dependability. Lifting the law paves true way for espionage and sabotage. Dear God, that's terrifying. Yes, it is, and that's actually very well put. And going back again, sort of just talking a little bit about Rome, it was the problem with the auxiliaries when they took over, the fact that they didn't really have the commitment to Rome. They didn't have the patriotism to Rome. They wondered, why should I risk my life for another person's country? And even if you're staying in the country, a lot of people that are sort of coming in, it's not so much they do it because they love Canada. There are a number of people who love Canada, without a doubt. Actually, about a month or so ago, when I was at the March on Parliament Hill with a bunch of Canadian patriots, about half of them were actually Chinese. They were Chinese Canadians who were upset because they had lived in China and lived underneath a communist government. And then they came to Canada and they were watching as Trudeau was going down the same route. It scared them that they were actually getting into that. So, but yeah, there's a lot of other people that just don't have that love for Canada, don't have that patriotism for our country, that I wouldn't feel comfortable that they would, if they were ever put into extreme combat situation. I'm sure, especially considering how the military requirements would also allow them to fast track them through to a citizenship. It's very hard to get a Canadian citizenship right now. You have to go through years. So a lot of these people would use the military as their way to fast track their way towards a citizenship. But then if ever the going got tough, they would just get going. Quiet Man. Maybe military would have folks joining if they felt safe in new equipment as opposed to German broomstick guns. Yeah, exactly. And that's just the same problem with our F-18 fighters. In fact, I saw a picture not too long ago, which was of, if everyone knows the astronaut Chris Hadfield, it was him when he was a young man serving as a fighter pilot, and he was flying the exact same F-18s that we have today. And what we're doing is we're just buying a bunch of old equipment off other nations, and we're just trying to refurbish them into new, to be used, to continue using. Again, we're Frankensteining a lot of our equipment just so it can keep going on longer and longer and longer, rather than investing in new equipment, which you have to do. And of course, it's going to be expensive. Of course, this isn't just something you just say, oh, okay, well, here's a bunch of money, go buy 30 new fighter jets or something. You have to invest in it, but we have to start investing now, because if we don't start investing now, then the problem is that when the time comes that we actually need this equipment, it's not going to be there for us. We need to, as I said at the beginning, it's better to need it, to have it and not need it, than to need it and not have it. So that was just a few of my ideas on when it came to Canada building up its military and meeting its NATO requirements. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me today. My name's Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion.